Most members of the public, when they see people who are just languishing out on the streets, they are unaware that many of them are dying on the streets.
Social services work essentially started with faith-based organizations in the U.S.
This is not just a local, regional, national challenge. It's really a global challenge.
Churches are everywhere. And it kind of solves that issue of where do we build?
Yes, we can see a lot of communities who can fight against affordable housing, but it's harder to do that with your pastor.
Foster youth, many of them have been in 30, 40, 50, I think the most was over 80 homes.
When we commit to bring people home, it provides us with the opportunity to also come home.
Communities of faith have a strong connection to homeless services. Some of the largest housing organizations in Los Angeles were originally founded by people of faith, and many churches and faith groups today provide vital services to unhoused people. In this episode, we sit down with leaders from LA's rehousing system as we explore the role these communities play in addressing the housing crisis, what has kept some of them on the sidelines, and what could lead to greater collaboration between local rehousing systems and faith communities today. Join us as we talk about homelessness, because there's no issue that's closer to home.
My name is Dr. Ryan Smith.
My name is Allison Crosby.
Joe Coletti.
I'm Reverend Calvin Sauls.
I'm Amara Anoniwu.
I'm Lei Fuimono. Welcome to Homeland. Is that all right? Is that close enough? I feel like I'm going to bite the thing.
That's great.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect. My first question will be around just your name, the organization you work for, what you do there, how long you've kind of been in that work, and then we'll just go from there.
My name is Lei, and I work for the Dream Center. I work with the emancipated youth or the foster youth home.
Talk to us a little bit about what is the Dream Center? What does it do?
The Dream Center is a not-for-profit organization based in Echo Park. We help people who are experiencing homelessness in just various different forms. We run residential programs, and we also have outreach programs. So that just means people going out into the neighborhoods, supplying basic needs like food, clothing, furniture, and things like that. And then we also have residential programs on campus where we house people for 12 to 24 months, sometimes longer. And so they're either youth, foster youth, or veterans, families, or people who are going through recovery. So that's currently who we house on campus, and they have approximately 500 beds available for people experiencing homelessness.
What are some of the distinctives of the Dream Center being a faith-based organization?
So we're a Christian church. We believe in Jesus, and everything that we do is through the lens of the gospel. And we're just trying to be the hands and feet of the Lord out here in these streets. So that's pretty much what it is that everything that we try and do, we try and be a good example of the Lord in the streets, into our community.
Can you paint a picture for us of the Dream Center campus? Kind of give us a tour of the scale of that campus. Mm-hmm. If you were to walk on campus, what would you see? What would you hear? Stuff like that. Gosh, sorry, Leigh. I'm getting a blast from the freaking past. Oh, right. I have not walked on these stairs in years. Oh my God. So what's in this building now?
So this is the foster youth.
Oh, this floor right here?
Yeah.
Wow.
So the first few rooms are the RO rooms.
Wow.
All of this will look familiar to you.
Very.
It's the old Queen of Angels Hospital. Just your typical old hospital, long corridors and rooms to the side, except our rooms are occupied by people who are experiencing homelessness.
Yeah.
And it's one floor now. And then on that side, where they first come in and kind of stabilize that first year, get used to the requirements and everything.
Yep.
And then once they've completed a year successfully, then they will qualify with points to go to the second side. So the second side, we furnish their rooms so that when they transition, they take all their furniture
Gotcha. That's cool.
Is the idea. All right, you guys.
Enjoy the rest of your night. It's nice meeting you guys.
When you come onto campus, it's pretty buzzy and busy with people who are loading food trucks or preparing clothing. There are lines of people coming in to have lunch. They feed the community every single day, 7 days a week. We have a food bank on campus, so there's other churches that are coming onto the campus to load up their trucks to go out to their communities and hand out food and things like that as well.
Yeah.
And then we have a lot of churches who come visiting with their youth groups, and they go out and do Bible studies and clean up the neighborhoods, pick up trash. So it's all just a lot of different activity happening on campus.
Yeah.
What has been that historic role of the faith community when it comes to addressing issues of social need?
Faith communities inherently seek the good of the person and the good of the community around them.
This is Amara Ananewu, co-chair of the Faith Collaborative to End Homelessness.
One of the things we really loved is that we always served restaurant style, because most services are kind of cafeteria, buffet, that sort of thing. Nothing wrong with that. But we just had an extra sense of wanting to acknowledge the dignity of the human who was in front of us and create an experience for them. And this was all like the church supported this. Lake Avenue has been doing this for 30 years, I want to say, this community meal. So a lot of people just come for the community.
Social services work essentially started with faith-based organizations in the U.S.
This is Allison Crosby, Associate Director of Systems and Planning at the Los Angeles Homeless Service Authority and co-chair of the Faith Collaborative to End Homelessness.
I think a lot of faith communities call towards things like coming from the Catholic tradition, like corporal works of mercy. Like, what does it mean to convene with God? What does it mean to experience God? And a lot of traditions believe that you experience that most predominantly when you are living with and in solidarity with the poor. And so that call and grounding to show up in community, create supportive spaces for community is something that faith communities have a long history of, and I think have created a lot of foundation that we're building off of in the work that we do now.
I would say the faith community has been at the forefront of social justice change.
Here's Dr. Ryan Smith, President and CEO of St. Joseph Center.
Obviously, many of us think about the legacy of Dr. King and all that he did in the civil rights movement. But we have to think of all of the faith community who were a part of the civil rights movement. There were folks from a number of Christian denominations and of Jewish faith and others who really banded together to fight for equal rights, for a number of communities, to fight for gender justice, to ensure that we always had our eye on how we uplift folks out of poverty. The faith community has been at the forefront and continues to be at the forefront in a very powerful way. I think people often associate the faith community with charity. And of course, that's been a part of it. But they have fought for change in this country dynamically.
If we can, I'd love to ask a question. What are some of your strongest memories of home? Like, what are your memories of family?
So I am Samoan, and I was born and raised in New Zealand. God, family, culture, village, these are all very, very important things at home. God is paramount, and then your family, and then your church, your community, your village. And so for me, my upbringing, my relationship with my family, my church, my community, it's all wonderful memories. You know, very rich and, you know, a lot of depth in that. Like I can introduce you today to my second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, 25th cousin, you know, however many removed. And so it's very foreign for me to meet young people who couldn't even tell me their mother or father's name.
What's been the biggest difference for you between your experience growing up in New Zealand and also what you've experienced here in Los Angeles?
I think the biggest difference for me is that it seems a lot more independent here. You know, where it's
like
just
individualistic or something like that?
Yeah,
or?
like it's more like about me. This life is about me and how I'm going to get mine. And at home, it's more about we're all going to eat, right? So out here, I think the biggest culture shock for me was that there's no sense of family here.
What brought you to LA?
I was kind of going deeper into my faith and sort of what God was all about. Like, all right, Lord, I've been riding on my parents' teachings and the church for this many years. I really need to figure out for myself who you are and what this is all about. So I heard about the Dream Center and just what they do out here. And I just felt very drawn to come out here and see what it was all about. So I came out here to do like mission work for 1 year in their volunteer program at the time.
Yeah.
And when I arrived, they put me with the teenagers. They put me with the at-risk youth, which was a program that was running at the time. And after that, it was a done deal. So I'm now just started my 16th year in LA. I was working at a dairy company in New Zealand. So it's kind of in the corporate world. And I thought, I'm going to get real rich and I'm going to make heaps of money and drive flash cars. And then I came here as a voluntary missionary and volunteered for like the first 8 years.
Gosh.
I think what I found was the work that I did here as a volunteer was so much more fulfilling to me as a human being than any paid job ever was.
In the late 1980s, in LA County, the city of Pasadena,
Here's Joe Coletti, CEO of the Hub for Urban Initiatives.
we began what was still known today as the Bad Weather Shelter, a seasonal shelter.
Well, how many staff? Was it just you or is
It was just me thinking that that's probably all we needed.
I first met Joe Coletti in 2016 when I was in grad school at Fuller Theological Seminary. Since then, he and his wife, Sofia Herrera, have become dear friends and mentors to me in this work.
From day one, you had anywhere from 100 to 200 people showing up. And during the first year, 7 days a week. And actually, they weren't days, they were nights, because the shelter didn't open until 5 o'clock in the evening, and it didn't close down until 7 in the morning. And I was the only person there in this big gymnasium with all these cots and all these people, just seeing everybody and getting a sense of the kind of hurt and woundedness that everybody was carrying with them into the evening. You didn't quite see that during the day. You saw it more at night. And so I would just sit there, and then I would go home and I would reflect on that experience night after night. And one of my favorite folks is the poet Alfred Tennyson. And he wrote, among other things, "I am part of all who I have met." And I would reflect on that, Joe, because the flip side of that was then all that I have met is part of me.
Houselessness really is a multifaceted, multiracial, multi-regional, as well as a multi-generational moral crisis.
This is Reverend Kelvin Sauls, former pastor of Holman United Methodist Church and former commissioner for the Los Angeles Homeless Service Authority.
And so how then do I bring that voice of faith to the table to collaborate with others to see how we can move towards a resolution and solution? I believe that we always have to lead with humanity and we lead with dignity.
Can you talk us a little bit about the program that you're in charge of at Dream Center? What it does, who it serves, stuff like that?
Yeah, so I work with the foster youth. So the foster youth are young people who are between the ages of 18 to 23 years old on intake. And basically, they're young people who have been in care, so in the foster care system at some point in their life. So whether they are emancipated when they apply for our program or not, some of them are still receiving services. But basically, our population are the youth who've been in the foster care system. So in the foster care system, the foster parents or the caregivers, they will receive a check on a monthly basis to help them support the youth that is living in their home. And many times a foster youth will feel like they are just a check, and they will feel like they were only in the home so that that foster parent could receive money. And so they've never really felt like they mattered or that people cared if they were home or not. You know, many of them are treated pretty badly. Of course, there are hundreds of incredible foster parents out there. But the ones who end up in our home, are typically the ones who have not had a very good experience with their foster parents. So they feel like a check. They feel like unseen, and they just feel like they don't really matter.
So for someone who's gone through the foster system in the United States, what is kind of the end of the line for that system? Like when a youth turns 18, becomes an adult, what normally happens to them?
So what usually happens at the age of 18 is if they are living with a foster care family or if they are in a group home, then they will be cut off from their services. So usually on their 18th birthday, they will be transitioned out of that home. And most of the time, they are given their belongings in a black trash bag and sent on their way. And at that point, they will either start couch surfing with friends. Some of them, have the ability to move into an apartment for a little time, but most of them will become homeless. So they'll either be chronically homeless or living in cars or, bouncing around from friend to friend.
Yeah. So you're 18 years old, here's your stuff, you're done.
Yes.
Is that essentially what happens?
Yes.
How many youth have come through the program at this point?
Hundreds. So,
Wow.
Yeah, I would say hundreds.
How long has the house been open?
So we opened August 2014 was when we opened our doors. At the time, we were in a building called Freedom House. And so our thought was to start with young people who were already in school. They did not have any addiction issues. They were homeless, but not chronically homeless, like on the streets, so that we could sort of roll out our cute little program and, assist them in continuing to go to school and go to work and, start going to church and just building relationship with life coaches and mentors and leaders in the church and get them stable. But
Is that how it turned out?
No, the first girl that we took in, I met her on Skid Row. I can't tell you. Sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, met her in Skid Row in the middle of the night. She's 19. And our first boy, he had been living under a bridge for 3 years. So God kind of flipped that whole plan upside down, and our first kids came in straight homeless, chronically homeless, and, many addiction issues, and then also a lot of mental health, of course. Yeah. So those were our first kids, and our first home pretty much followed suit after that.
Yeah.
What Leigh's describing is radical hospitality. Those who work in homeless services might call it housing first. The concepts are actually quite simple. Both radical hospitality and housing first believe in making space and meeting the needs of others, regardless if they've done anything to earn that support. Some in the faith community might call this unconditional love. During my conversation with Allison, she shared a moment in her life when she came into a profound understanding of radical hospitality.
The faith community, this work is deeply relational. I was raised by a mother that is a kid of 11 from a very Catholic farm family. I learned very early from family culture that if someone was in need or needed help, it was never, can you come, but what time will you be here? We have an obligation to one another, that our success is mutually dependent. And so when I went to college, I found a house in Santa Ana, Southern California, and they were doing something that they referred to as radical hospitality at that time. And essentially you live in the shelter and help support the operations and the folks that stay there. And at that time, there were 120 people living in that house, and half of them were children.
Wow.
There was no publicly accessible homeless shelter, especially for families. I will always say that summer radically changed the trajectory of my life. Because living there in community with families and single women at that time, it was my first exposure to urban poverty, my first exposure to severe mental illness, especially when combined with a substance abuse or addiction, my first exposure to sex work, and then also kids being in the mix of all of that.
Is there a story during that time of someone who maybe lived in the house that stands out to you or that you recall from time to time now?
Yeah. For a period of time during that summer, I had started like a girls group where girls between a certain age, we would all go together and like walk to a local coffee shop and like have tea and like talk about stuff. And the group was great, but this one little girl in particular was having a hard time. Just behaviorally, it was really hard for me to figure out how to support her, how to manage her behavior, how to like help her figure out how to be a part of the group. And Sweet Thing had been exposed to a lot of traumatic incidents. Like her early life was rough. I did not know how to support or be in relationship with this little girl. And another night where like I ended up like in the office in tears, and Sweet Leia had about enough of my like emotional meltdowns.
Wow.
And so finally she looked at me and she was like, Allison, I just gotta be really honest with you. Like, I can tell that your heart is in this work, but I also have to tell you that work like this is not for everyone. And like, you have to make a decision about whether or not this is the right thing for you. And she goes, I'll tell you, you know, when Dwight and I first moved to the house, they legit did a whole like sell everything you own and dedicate your life to the work. Both of them did. And shortly after they moved into the house, Leia tells a story about how it kind of dawned on her the reality of what they had done. And she kind of was like, I gotta get out of here. This is wild. Wow. Dwight walked in on her at one point looking in the newspaper for apartments for rent back when that was a thing. And then they got into a conversation about why she was doing that. And that story essentially ends with them having a conversation and saying that we knew full well that we wanted to dedicate our lives to our faith and that it was going to be hard. And he looked at her and said, the nails go here, and touched his wrists and then walked out. And so Leia essentially said to me, like, I extend the same message to you. This work is painful. These experiences are painful. Being in relationship and in solidarity with poverty and suffering is painful. And this is also the place where we most fundamentally experience God. She touched her wrists and then she walked out of the office. And so it was at that point where I was like, okay, I got to get it together. Like, I don't want to leave. I love this, but I got to figure out how to like get it together. And so I have CWs on my wrists, Catholic worker, to remind me that obviously we have to take care of ourselves to have longevity in this work. It's a marathon. But suffering comes with the work, exposing yourself to suffering, being in accompaniment with suffering, and knowing that experiencing suffering kind of in solidarity with one another, there's something really transformative that happens.
The practice of radical hospitality is not a new concept for faith communities. In the year 166 CE, the Roman Empire was facing an unprecedented medical crisis. Returning Roman soldiers brought with them what scholars today believe to be the first smallpox outbreak. The resulting pandemic devastated Rome. As wealthy Romans fled to the countryside to escape the pandemic in the city core, a local Christian leader, Cyprian, took unprecedented action. He urged the rich to donate funds and the poor to volunteer their service for relief efforts. Under Cyprian's direction, Christians buried the dead left in the streets and cared for the sick and the dying. For 5 years, he stood in the breach, organizing relief efforts until he was forced into exile. The action taken by this community leader proved monumental. For the first time in history, a community systematically extended health care to all. This action, however, came at a great personal cost, as many contracted the very disease they sought to bring relief to.
Haley and I, my wife, we worked in the home, and that's really where, you know, we got to know you and the residents. And I remember some of the men that lived on our floor, and yeah, it felt like there was an asterisk next to every kind act, because in the past, it was a check that their foster parents were getting. And so everything was suspect. It was like, well, are you actually doing this because you care about me? Are you asking how I'm doing because you actually want to know? Or is it just because like you're getting money for this.
Right.
And
then they find out you all were volunteers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember one of the gentlemen on the floor, while he was with us, he had a pretty startling realization that he had while he was in the house that, he had actually, his mom hadn't given him a name at birth. And so there's these monumental things, receiving a name, receiving that kind of ownership from your parent. Some of the guys, they had been through, 20 or 30 homes by the time they had gotten to the Freedom House. And that level of instability, how does that impact someone? When someone has those experience where they've been through multiple homes or they have those types of experience, what are some of the things that they have to work through when that's been their experience thus far?
I think it just really knocks their sense of self-worth, and they just feel, again, like they just don't matter. And like you said, many of them have been in 30, 40, 50, I think the most was over 80 homes, since they were left in a parking lot as a baby.
They've been through 80 homes.
Yeah, and been abused in many of those homes. And so I think you're willing to buy your peace at any cost. Use your body, use drugs, use people, use material things, whatever it costs to purchase peace, in this world, or feel loved in this world, or feel happy in this world. Like, they're not bad. They're just trying to pursue these things through any means possible. And so many of them will, in their lives, turn to substances, self-medicate, when they age out of the system, or not even that. Many of them are self-medicating when they're 9, 10, 11 years old, already started to smoke weed or, start drinking alcohol, start dabbling in, the harder drugs because it's just lying around their houses. But it really messes with their sense of self-worth, their identity, and just feeling like they're worth being loved and worth people noticing them.
Yeah. So for a youth who's coming to the Freedom House, what are some of the things that they would experience? Like living in the home, what are some of the activities they might partake in? What does it mean to be kind of a resident of the Freedom House?
The goal of our team is to make them feel loved and make them feel like they are part of a family. The challenge is that many of them have been in and out of jail, grown up in juvenile halls or camps, or they have lived their whole lives in a group home. So the goal of our team is that we would build a strong relationship with our youth so that their encounter is different.
Yeah.
So that when they get home, we're excited to see them. When they act up, we're excited to see them. They get told, I love you a lot. They get told, you're doing great, keep going. It's about just encouraging them and making them feel the presence of God truly, that they might encounter a real and living God in our simple conversations, whether it's about how was your day today? What are some of your highs? What are some of your lows? What'd you eat today? Like us being excited about them being home, us noticing that they're not home, us noticing their interests and just seeing them, where they're at. The hope is just that they'll really feel like they belong somewhere and that they matter and that we see them and we love them.
I mean, it sounds just like the activities of daily living almost. Just, hey, we love you. We see you. We recognize you. We hear you. We celebrate you. Things that would hopefully be happening in a family.
Yeah.
For all of the transformative work communities of faith have done in welcoming the neighbor, there have been and continue to be moments of failure. I personally worked for faith communities and churches who perpetuated serious harm in people's lives, damaging community instead of fostering it, isolating instead of welcoming. Maybe you can relate. As I was speaking with Reverend Sauls, I wanted to better understand what gets in the way of communities of faith practicing radical hospitality.
There's so many members of faith community that I've spoken with who are hesitant about becoming part of the work to end homelessness. There's certain fears they may have. There are certain hesitations they may have. Did you encounter that when you were part of leading these communities, and how did you navigate that hesitancy or that fear, if I can call it that?
The fear is always there, because in so many ways, part of the giant falling asleep has been just a disposition of preservation, right? Every faith community starts out with good intentions and an audacious mission statement, right? And then as we grow into that, instead of upgrading it, we look for ways to try and see how do we now preserve that. I'll never forget when I would go home, to South Africa, Johannesburg, big city like LA, and the homeless crisis. I always wanted to make sure that I connect with some kind of a ministry. And so we had that Central Methodist Mission. And Mvume Dandala was the pastor, the mentor of mine. And a friend of mine, Judy Bessingwaith, was over the street ministry that was a combination of food and health.
Okay.
And it took place on Wednesday. So instead of having a Wednesday prayer service, they had a Wednesday street outreach. I'll never forget what Mvume would say to us as part of a devotional time before we'd go out. He said, get real close to who you're going to serve. I mean, as close as to not be an intrusion to them. He said, and then try and look them in the eye. And then he says, when you're able to make eye contact with them, say thank you. Say thank you for allowing you to be in ministry with Christ. Because Scripture says, whatever you do to the least of these, you do unto me. So he brings together, in this, for me, divinity connecting with humanity.
Wow.
And I think that's what proximation will do for us. I encourage, every faith leader, rabbi, pastor, imam, proximate. Bring your folk closer and closer to those who are experiencing the pain. And as you know, several of us are one or two paychecks away from that. And I think that may be part of the fear, because we see what could happen to us. But fear in some ways can be fictional experiences appearing real, right? Fear can be a way we get paralyzed in terms of creativity, innovation, etc., etc. But I look at fear really as that which mobilizes me to explore the unknown, because I've discovered it's in the unknown where I miraculously experience the divine.
Yeah.
So I invite folk not to look at the vitality of their faith as based on seeking out the places of comfort, right? But that the vitality of your faith is going to the places where the fires burn most furiously. And you'll be amazed at how your faith gets refined, redefined, and also revived.
One of the questions we asked several of our colleagues during this project is, what would failure look like if we as Angelinos or members of faith communities remained siloed or fearful of being hospitable, making space for others? There was no response more sobering than that of my friend and mentor, Joe Coletti.
What it looks like today that most people see is people languishing out on the streets. However, most members of the public, when they see people who are just languishing out on the streets, they are unaware that many of them are dying on the streets. So every year for the past, 6, 7, 8 years, I've always requested from the LA County Coroner's Office their mortality data concerning people who are homeless. And right now, the data shows that 5 people per day die while homeless in LA County. So 5 people today are going to die while homeless, as was the case yesterday and the day before, which will be the case tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, is that you have 5 people per day die while homeless on the streets. A few years ago, I was able to be on the phone with the LA County Coroner's Office Chief Medical Examiner. And I said, I got your data here, and I was looking at the age, and I said, I see somebody here age 66. I know what that means. I see somebody here 46. I know what that means. I say, I even see a 16-year-old, and that's a little disturbing. And then I said, I even see someone who's 6 years old. And I said, and that's even more disturbing. But I said, but what I got to ask you is, what are these age zeros? The answer was infants. Less than 1 year old that died on the streets while homeless. And so that's happening today, and it's happening tomorrow and the day after tomorrow.
When I interview people to be a life coach or a resident advisor or in our home or with our team, I always say, like, I can train everything, but I need you to be kind. And if you are kind, we can work on everything else. But if you are not kind, this ain't going to work for you. If you do not love young people, this will not work for you. You know, I know people say, you know, let's do it for the experience. No, you really have to be called. You know, you really have to feel like this is something that God is leading you to do, because when it goes beyond the experience piece of it, like, you're going to have to tap into something a bit deeper than that. There's going to be moments where we're just going to move blindly because we just trust that God is leading and He will make a way and we'll figure it out as we go. Walking through seasons where, like,
That's okay.
Going to hospitals, going to funerals, going to courthouses, going to jails. That is difficult stuff, man. Like, and picking kids up in the middle of the night, going to like crazy neighborhoods. Like, that is not what I thought I would be doing in life, you know? Like, one of my boys, his car was stolen. He shaved his head, went to a neighborhood that was, really dangerous neighborhood. And he called me and asked me if I could bring him, the steering wheel to his car that he found. And so me and my friend Caleb, we went to this really dangerous neighborhood, and there's my boy standing there. And right when we pulled up, this lowrider pulled up right next to him. They were bald-headed, tattoos and everything. And I just grabbed the steering wheel, jumped I'm like, this is how we die, Caleb, get up. And so we got out of the car and was just like, hi, okay, here it is, here. And we just started talking as loud as possible. Those guys in the lowrider just turned around, looked at me, whatever they were fiddling with under their seats, just put it back, put their arms up, stared at him, stared at us, and then just drove away. They say, sometimes you just have this chutzpah, right? Just this bold, blind faith, and it's just sometimes you just got to move and act. But I think for this boy, it meant something else. It was so much deeper for him than our experience,
What did it mean for him?
I think for him, it showed him unconditional love. His friends hadn't shown up that he had called way before he called us. His homies, his boys, whatever, they didn't show up. The dreams had a TV show. He was like, oh, great. Of everybody I called, these are the two that show up, right? So, wow. Every single Thanksgiving and every single Christmas and every single, holiday, he's right there. Miss Leigh, you going to church? Okay, I'll come to church with you.
Wow.
That boy, he grew up in South Central and, very difficult life, lots of violence, lots of abuse. That was 2015-16, he was in the home. And I think he just turned 32. He now has bought himself a 3-bedroom house in Vegas, saved a lot of money, doing really, really well.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's my boy. And, he'll come every time he's in LA, he'll come by and we'll go to church and, go eat. And, we always save him a seat at Thanksgiving because they got family here, but they don't always get invited. So with our youth, they always have a seat at the table. It doesn't matter how many years it's been since you lived with us. Like, they know this home. Like, Miss Leigh, you guys having Thanksgiving? We sure are. Oh. Every year we do Thanksgiving with our youth on Thanksgiving Day. We do our Christmas morning breakfast on Christmas Day because we are their family.
I want to talk about just maybe zoom out a little bit, like the strength the faith community brings. And I'm speaking as globally as possible around people of faith who, what you're really talking about is you're talking about deep relationship, deep community, deep sacrificial living, radical hospitality, making space for people who have different experiences than you. That is, I think, the engine of the faith community. And they're meeting so many needs and they're historic partners in this work. It's an incredible thing to witness and be a part of. Yeah. You've experienced it. I've experienced it as well. And specifically when we think about some of the crises we face in our city, specifically homelessness, that's a powerful force. How do we honor the legacy of that? How do we partner with communities who have that just raw energy without diminishing it, without watering it down?
Yeah.
What does it look like for us to partner in a way that there's mutual respect and there's mutual honoring of what faith communities bring, what their strengths are?
Yeah. When it comes to like the strength or the real gifts that faith communities have to offer in response to the struggle and the pain that our community is going through right now in terms of just the sheer mass of people who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, is this understanding that through being in relationship will we be transformed and more deeply know God, to more deeply know ourselves, know others, and then to know the bigness that bonds us all together. The way that vision is cast, the way that people get to show up, the way that people are seen, and a reckless abandon to embrace one another.
There's a powerful tradition of faith in America. There's, historic tradition. There's also a very strong narrative around the separation of church and state. Where in your position do you see room for growth between these two entities that historically have said, well, we need to have some separation. We need to be distinct from one another.
Right. The first example that comes to my mind is in housing.
Here's Amara Ananiwu again.
Government agencies, developers who are building housing, there could be a great partnership within community with faith entities in supporting the people who are in housing.
Do you feel like faith communities should think about getting into the housing space themselves?
Absolutely.
What are some of the encouragements you might have on like why they should?
Yes.
Like why it would be something that would be important for them to consider seriously?
Yeah.
I know that's the most leading question in the world.
Right. Why should
Clearly we want you to build. But like
please build.
But why? I think why is important.
Churches are everywhere. There are 2,000 on the way here. Like there's like 6 on my block. And it kind of solves that issue of like, where do we build? Well, you have institutions who are part of the neighborhood, part of the design scape, right?
Yeah.
So I know these are things that people care about, and that's fine. I care about them too. So it solves that issue. It speaks to the retention issue that you have someone who's looking out for people on their property. They're going to care for that. I think there's a mutual respect that happens there that might even be greater than other housing options. I also think there is room for variety because not everyone has the capacity to build, the next high rise because they own all of this property. Yeah. But they can build an ADU, which might be an even more intimate relationship with this person who gets to live
ADU
there.
For us?
Accessory dwelling unit.
Yeah,
and it is an addition to your home or property.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it allows for variety. So some can build ADUs, some can build development, some can do something in between.
Yeah.
It adds to the housing stock. And my gosh, are we looking for land here in California? So why not trade on the land that exists with partners that for the most part we trust and can count on the longevity.
This is an important inflection point, I think, for the faith community as it relates to housing. Well, there is an opportunity that actually passed in the Senate and the California legislature this year with Senate Bill 4, where, we experienced a lot of NIMBYism and not in my backyard.
Yeah.
SB 4 was yes in God's backyard in many ways, and was passed in order to ensure that we can really create and produce affordable housing on faith lands.
Here's Dr. Ryan Smith again.
So now congregations across the state can actually build affordable housing with prevailing wages connected to labor, and to ensure that we're actually creating more product so that we have folks who can call a space home.
Yeah.
And that is really powerful. And I've seen the faith community actually start to really galvanize around this. And this is exciting for me for two reasons.
Yeah.
Well, one reason is we need more affordable housing. I think we
do.
all know that. Just looking at the Archdiocese here in Los Angeles, there is a lot of land that churches own that are underutilized in this moment. So this provides an opportunity just to think innovatively for those folks where there were a lot of challenges and local barriers. Those have been uplifted from the state, which is great.
Yeah.
Number two, churches have been amazing at setting the narrative and reshaping the narrative in ways that are really exciting. I believe moral suasion is real. Yes, we can see a lot of communities who can fight against affordable housing, but it's harder to do that with your pastor.
Yeah.
It's harder to do that with folks of faith who remind us of the moral good of the work that we need to do. Yes, sometimes folks think about their own interest, but it's faith communities that have thought about the public good, how we can band together in order to uplift those who often don't have a voice.
Yeah.
And now you have another powerful group of folks who can remind us that it is our responsibility to address it in homelessness in this generation.
I could literally just talk to you for hours. So the last question I'll ask, because there's so much that we can still talk about, the last question for now I'll ask is just if there's anything else you would want to share with members of faith communities here in Los Angeles about this work of bringing people home.
When we commit to bring people home, it provides us with the opportunity to also come home. How do we boldly help people bridge into what I would call equitable belonging? How can I justify my humanity by how I have facilitated the invisibility of a fellow human being? We continue to have an extraordinary opportunity to see how we can rise above politics, rise above whether we progressive or liberal or conservative, rise above anything that entraps our humanity.
2 centuries after Cyprian's decisive action, a local church leader in Alexandria, Egypt, organized a group of men from the poorer classes to care for and transport the sick. This group risked their lives to provide medical care for the untouchables of their city, caring for those who needed it, and overseeing burial of the dead. They earned the nickname Parabolani. It is translated literally as persons who risk their lives as nurses. Over time, the Parabolani came to be known by another moniker, the Reckless Ones.
Have you changed over the last 15 years through the work that you've done?
I hope so. Shoot. I mean, I hope I'm a better person. Like, I hope that I'm more patient and more kind and, slower to judge a person. I hope that I'm more compassionate towards young people and just people who are experiencing homelessness, knowing that every single one of them has a story. Just because I came from this rich background, family, culture, and all of that, not everybody has experienced that in life. And I see and appreciate my upbringing so much more now. And, my heart is to just really share it with our young people as much as I can. But yeah, it's just kind of made me so much more aware and appreciative of the upbringing and the culture and the village that I grew up in, that God allowed me to be raised in, that I might come out here and hopefully share some of that with the young people. Hopefully they will feel some of what I experienced growing up. Hopefully I'm able to now create that in a home for our youth here, and hopefully they'll be able to create it in their own homes. So yeah, hopefully I'm a nicer person now. We have to ask my kids.
What you're doing in social services, working with foster youth, can be really challenging. Like, and you've done it for a long time. So like, what are the things that you say, like, this is something that's actually like kept me going? It's continued to encourage me in this work that I'm doing.
I feel very honored to serve our young people. They're my family. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't have my own children. Single. God has not blessed me with my own children, right? Because my husband, he just be taking too long. But he has blessed me with young people that I can raise, and it's not a job. Like, I didn't come out here for money or for things. Like, I'm very, very inspired every single day because our young people are the most resilient people on the planet. For them to sort of have lived through the things that they've lived through and the battles that they fight every single day just to get up in the morning, like, it's so much happening, like the jobs and the school and everything. Yeah, that's awesome and lovely. But there is so much mental and spiritual battle that they go through before they even get up out of bed.
Yeah.
And for them to be able to do that every single, what the heck am I got to complain about? They're the most inspiring, incredible young people on the planet. And it's just, I feel very honored to serve and walk alongside them in this life.
Communities of faith have a long tradition of caring for the neighbor and practicing radical and reckless hospitality. Many of the social services, housing, nonprofit, humanitarian, and medical organizations today can trace their roots to people of strong faith who believed in the dignity of all. Over time, and for reasons that could fill another podcast season, much of this critical community-based work in larger cities was taken on by local governments, as many faith communities retreated from the urban core, either physically or practically. As the housing crisis continues, both in Los Angeles and across the country, what's needed again are people and communities driven by reckless hospitality. Beliefs are meaningless if not validated by action. We cannot say we love our neighbor if our neighbor is dying on the streets. This is a moment of crisis and a moment of opportunity. Will people of faith please stand up? On our next episode, It Takes a Pueblo, we sit down with leaders of homeless service providers, advocacy groups, and system administrators on the eve of the 2024 elections to discuss the role of community in ending homelessness. All that and more, next time on Homeland. We want to invite you to join the Homeland by subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts. For more information on how to gain a deeper understanding of homelessness, visit ourhomeland.us for additional content, photos, and more resources on how you can join the work of bringing people home. Homeland was created by myself, Ben Kay, and Fulcrum Productions in association with Historia. The complete series is brought to you by United Way of Greater Los Angeles and distributed by PRX. This episode was written and produced by Ben Kay, Andrew Didway, and Daniel Jeter. Marketing, additional production, and photography by Jared Beasley. This episode was edited by Daniel Jeter. Our original music is by Jeffrey Emerson Geyser. Episode artwork by Philippe Martinez. Our social media manager is Veronica Roy. The Homeland Podcast consulting crew is Marisol Bayo, Jerry Jones, Hazel Lopez, and Barbara Osborne. Members of the Homeland Advisory Committee for this episode are Shannon Murray, Janine Solorio, Omar Gutierrez, and Suzette Shaw. We would like to say thank you to all those who helped us along the way and ultimately brought this project to life. This episode is dedicated to the Dream Center Reckless Ones: Jesse and Lindsay Kramer, Jonah and Katie Martinez, Caleb Piles, Leigh Famono, Jenna Kennedy, Brady Sanders, Alexa Durst, Carl Callens, Sierra Wilson, Brenna Jones-Higgins, Chaz DeSanto, Mary Allman, June Kim, Tim Kay, Sean Smith, Daniel Gilchrist, and to the Pueblos crew who taught me what loving your neighbor really means: Anna, Rose, Monica, Jackie, Rebecca, Johnny, Kim, Kimsley, T-Dub, Marco, and my partner for life, Haley. Thanks for listening, folks. Let's keep talking.